Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And if you want to keep up with all things Clown Decade, then please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a member. Now today we actually have some relatively good news from the Manchester Airport incident, which I covered 9 months ago, when Reform, where two of these people in this thumbnail are no longer Reform MPs, but still they were part of this, decided to try and push for a private prosecution of two wrong-uns who assaulted police officers in Manchester Airport, and due to this it strong-armed the CPS to not be embarrassed by private prosecution to actually try and prosecute the two assaulters themselves. Well, luckily we can now consider this a Reform victory, as Mohammed Fahir Amaz, 20, has been convicted of assaulting two female police officers based at Manchester Airport last July, as well as a preceding assault on a member of the public at a Starbucks based within Terminal 2 arrivals, which is why they were getting arrested. Meaning there's a hell of a story to this. However, as you can see on the screen, we actually got CCTV footage of the entire incident rather than just the part where the criminal got his head stamped on by a firearms officer, and frankly, especially after that, well, those few hooks actually on female officers, he's quite lucky not to have a bullet in him. As I said at the time, we found out that he broke two female officers' noses, and after watching this, frankly, yeah, I'm even more convinced that he is very, very lucky to be alive. Because after going off like this, and I believe there was even an attempt to get a firearms officer's gun, why would you assume that he would be pacified? However, it's quite clear in the video where he does get his head stamped, he is relatively pacified, but honestly, when you're getting the red mist like that, let's face it, most people are okay with criminals and scumbags like this getting a bit of a kicking. And we also got body cam released, and yeah, this woman who took a frankly mean right hook, yeah, she got a broken nose and is quite clearly in some distress. Though on the bright side, at least she's nicely healed. It seemed quite obvious to me and basically everyone that has seen this footage that, yeah, it's pretty obvious he was going down for assault. Though there is the question of why the other perpetrator didn't get a conviction. Well, this is what we've got the news for. So let's take a look at the deets. So a jury at Liverpool Crown Court found Mohammed Fahir Amaz, 20, from Rochdale guilty of assaulting PC Lydia Ward, PC Ellie Cook, and a member of the public. Which is quite odd. I don't know why Liverpool Crown Court was taking this case, given that it was Greater Manchester Police, which obviously you'd expect Manchester Crown Court to take this case, but okay. Along with that, the perpetrator is from Rochdale, and Manchester Airport, believe it or not, is in South Manchester. But anyway, that's not an important part. Despite poring over footage from body-worn cameras and CCTV taken from multiple angles, the jury was unable to reach a verdict on allegations that Amaz and his brother, Mohammed Ahmad, 26, had assaulted a third police officer, PC Zachary Marsden, during an attempted arrest on July 23 last year. Yet that's where people were getting worried at the start of the week, because there was news coming out that the jury could not reach a verdict. There was many a speculation as to why, and frankly, in my mind, it's making sense why Lee Kuan Yew, the first Prime Minister of Singapore, decided that, well, juries weren't exactly that great in multicultural societies. But we don't know who the jurors are, so we don't actually know if it was, say, native Brits with very, very liberal tendencies effectively having the outlook that, oh, clearly these people didn't know what they were doing, whatever their reasoning is for letting them off. The prosecution, which is now considering a retrial, said that the brothers had inflicted a high level of violence on police, saw that pretty clearly, a claim the defendant rejected, stating they were acting in self-defence and accusing Marsden of using unlawful force against them. Which I would imagine that is the guy who stamped on their face, and that is obviously after the fact anyway, but there is no way you can watch that CCTV footage and say that is self-defence. You cannot use self-defence against being arrested by the police, even if you are very sceptical of the police. But my god, I'm also just remembering the fact that the two Mohammeds ended up going on broadcast TV with their lawyer, effectively to say they didn't do nothing. I mean, that's really bitten them in the behind, hasn't it? I mean, there were also plenty of Labour politicians instinctively taking their side as well, and it's come down like a ton of bricks on them. But we'll get into that later. So the whole story here is that the two brothers had driven to Manchester Airport along with their nephew to pick up their mother, who was due to arrive back on a flight from Pakistan. And according to Amaz, the one who's been convicted, their mother told them that it was the worst 8 hours of their life, the flight, that means, because she had been racially abused, called a bad word for Pakistani bitch, and hit his luggage into the back of her legs. And at 8:20 p.m, as the family walked to the car park, they passed a Starbucks where Akhtar spotted, Abdul Karim Ismail, the passenger who she said had been harassing her. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I'll put it this way, this seems quite a typical story in multicultural Britain. The brothers entered the cafe and the confrontation ensued. Amaz, who headbutted and punched Ismail in front of his wife and children, would later claim Ismail had been threatening him. Again, there has to be CCTV of that. I have not seen any CCTV of that, but, these places like train stations and airports, they have a ridiculous amount of CCTV exactly for things like this. And again, it's incredible to me how the other brother Akhtar got let off, which is why I'm not shocked the prosecution is looking for a retrial. And if it comes down to it, if jury trials are becoming a bit of an issue because a jury trial let off the Colston Four who threw the statue into the Bristol Quay, if they're letting off this man who goes up to people in Starbucks to headbutt them, then clearly we have a bit of an issue. And I'm not particularly for juries if, as I say, they are an issue with getting people convicted. And we have precedents to change the legal system if conviction rates are dropping, because quite infamously back in the 1800s, convictions for rape by jury trial were quite low, because the punishment for rape in the 1800s was the death penalty. So they lowered the sentencing guidelines to just be life in prison, obviously in case there's evidence that they were wrongfully convicted. And wouldn't you know it, juries start convicting rapists more. So there's things you can do to the legal system to fix this. It's not unprecedented. You don't have to keep it in place forever. Obviously, Labour wouldn't let you know that, but there we go. The police were then called to the assault and caught up with the family as they were paying for their parking shortly after 8:28 p.m. Marsden said that he approached Amaz to arrest him, but he resisted, and the brother then intervened. Both brothers were accused of assaulting Marsden, but the jury could not agree on a verdict, which is just mad to me. I suppose the argument against this would be that while he's being arrested, it looks like Marsden, who I assume is on the right, does throw a punch first. But at the end of the day, if you have a man bigger than you walking up behind you as you're trying to arrest someone, I suppose self-defense instincts get kicked in. And obviously after this, a fight ensued. At the end of the day, you can't just go up behind a police officer to stop him arresting someone. You just can't do that, which is what he tried to do. And especially with the fact that he assaulted someone in the Starbucks as well, which no doubt there's CCTV on. So yeah, I kind of get why they're not convicting him with this. I can see the argument against it, but realistically, if he's assaulted a man in a Starbucks as well, yeah, he should be going down for this anyway. Amaz was found guilty of assaulting Cook and Ward, having thrown punches at both officers, breaking Ward's nose. He wasn't getting away with that. The jury was shown footage of the subsequent moments when Amaz was tasered and kicked while his mother tried to shield him from the blows. In evidence, Marsden denied inflicting gratuitous violence and said he stamped his foot down to catch the wire on his radio, which had fallen from him. Realistically, I don't buy that, but ultimately, in a case like this, I guess you've got to try and use any excuse you can to avoid saying, yes, I stamped on his face because he punched me. But whatever, he's convicted. Bodycam footage was also played to the court of another officer telling a man, if you move, we'll smash your effing face in. Yeah, standard. Honestly, I wish for a world where we had more police like that, to be quite honest with you, but whatever. The defence alleged that the officers had used unlawful force as they grabbed Amaz from behind without announcing themselves, and that he and his brother were acting in self-defence and defence of the other. Amaz said that he feared the lunatic Marsden would batter him to death, and a man said he believed he was under attack. Well, I guess you kind of are. You are being arrested. But I'm not being funny. Okay, the officers might not have announced themselves clearly enough, but if you have 3 officers arresting your brother, I'm not being funny. The last thing I do is try and break their noses. But I guess that's just me. Anyway, that was the details of what happened at Manchester Airport and why obviously Amaz was not getting away with it, but why Amand largely seemed to get away with it. And I'm honestly with the police on this, prosecution even. There should absolutely be a retrial for both of them to be put away. Amaz, who broke the 2 female officers' noses, yep, he should go away for longer, sure, but quite clearly a man definitely needs some time in jail as well, because regardless of whether the man was racially abusive to his mother or not and pushed some luggage into her legs, that is obviously no excuse whatsoever to go into a Starbucks and start an altercation to headbutt him, which we probably don't have CCTV on, obviously, to protect the identity of the man accused of racially abusing the mother, but whatever. Anyway, in a quick trip down memory lane, it's worth remembering that just after this incident happened, we got an announcement from the Home Secretary effectively saying, "I welcome the engagement by local communities, the Mayor of Manchester and the IOPC for investigating these officers. I understand there's distress, but the decision everyone has made is largely in keeping with what we'd expect." And this, of course, is after the CPS effectively said, yeah, we're not going to prosecute them. And this is why Reform got involved and said, okay, we'll do it privately then, strong-arming the CPS into actually having to prosecute them. And wouldn't you know it, they got a guilty verdict out of it, so well done. There's also a statement from Paul Waugh, who is the Workers' Party of Britain, or George Galloway's party MP, for Rochdale, which is obviously where the perpetrator and other suspect were from. And in his statement he said, "The video footage of the Greater Manchester police officer kicking and stamping on a man in Manchester Airport is truly shocking and disturbing. Like many who have seen this clip, I am extremely concerned. I have had it confirmed that the man arrested is a Rochdale resident, and I have talked to his family this evening. I plan to meet them in person tomorrow. I've expressed my concern directly to the Assistant Chief Constable this evening and have been in touch with Kate Green, Deputy Mayor of Policing for Greater Manchester. It's right the police officer concerned has been removed from duties and that this incident has been referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. I expect a thorough and swift investigation." Again, how does this look now? Everyone came out, well, not everyone, an awful lot of left-wingers came out to say, oh, these two men, yeah, they didn't do anything wrong. And now it turns out they've gone through the courts, and it turns out one of the brothers actually did do something wrong, and the other effectively got away with it because the officers threw the first punch. What happened in the Starbucks, though? I don't know why he's not been convicted for that. Well, hence they are pushing for a retrial. And of course, I went through this in the last video, but let's not forget that there was an awfully large crowd of the community the two suspects and now one perpetrator is from, having a big old protest outside of Rochdale Police Station, with some people trying to cause criminal damage as well, if you remember, despite the fact that the airport police have nothing to do with the Rochdale branch of the Greater Manchester Police. But that doesn't particularly matter. Two of their community have been arrested for assaulting police officers and another guy, and that's good enough for them to, well, make one of these large-scale protests, which obviously, if they're outside migrant hotels, are condemned to the back teeth. Anyway, in the Mail today, a police chief has thanked the public for backing officers brutally assaulted in a brawl at Manchester Airport after a student was convicted over the attack. Oh yeah, he was a student, by the way, as well. God knows what university he's at, God knows what he's studying, but apparently he is a student. One of the two brothers accused of raining down blows during the incident was found guilty yesterday of assaulting two female police officers. The case gained national attention after shocking footage of a policeman kicking a teenage suspect in the head as he lay prone on the ground was viewed millions of times. But the days later, leaked CCTV of the moment before showed how Mohammed Fahir Amaz had fought and grappled with the officers and two female colleagues, obviously breaking one of their noses. So Sir Stephen Watson, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, praised the officers for putting themselves in harm's way to tackle outrageous criminal behaviour, and he added, "I am particularly grateful to those many members of the public who have contacted the force in order to pass on their best wishes to the officers." He said the officers were responding quickly to precisely the sort of outrageous criminal behaviour that rightly offends the public. Whilst assaults on police officers are sadly not uncommon, 44 of my officers are assaulted every week across Greater Manchester. Such attacks are never justified. And Mike Peake, the chairman of Greater Manchester Police Federation, which has been supporting the officers involved, said the public needed to get behind the police. Police officers in Manchester work in a difficult, dangerous and dynamic world where there is no such thing as a routine incident. They deserve support in that work from the public and politicians. Distressing scenes we have seen during this trial show some of the worst sides of the police work that our officers are faced with. We are bloodied and we are bruised. Yeah, and it's why quite typically I am instinctively on the side of the police. Ultimately, they are people trying to do good work. However, obviously, you then have them bussing in people, say at the Epping protest, effectively literally just being put there to raise tensions and have an excuse to get the riot police out. There's underhanded methods to some police forces, and there were like 14 across Britain or something like that, probably more, and they all work in different ways, and they all have their own set of priorities. You got to bear that in mind. Manchester Police are actually one of the better ones. South Yorkshire, famously terrible. Essex, also famously terrible for going to Alison Pearson's door to ask about a tweet it took her a couple of hours to delete. I think Lucy Connolly had a knock at the door from the Northamptonshire Police. Ultimately, it is down to the chief constables how policing is done in these areas, and quite clearly Manchester Police does have a chief constable who is going to be on the side of his officers for doing the right thing. And with all this, Richard Tice put pressure on the IOPC to ask, will you now be immediately clearing the Manchester Airport police officers who are still investigating, as we've all seen the videos, and frankly they've done very little wrong. What are you waiting for? Because silence is not an option and you need to justify your existence and competence. And I do largely agree. It's crazy to me how it's taken 9 months to get this case through to the courts, through to a jury, and finally get to a verdict, and the IOPC, who obviously have access to all the same evidence, can't come to clear these names. And to me it's quite obvious why. Because what tends to happen if you end up clearing these officers' names and nothing ends up actually happening to them? Well, you end up with the local community in Rochdale having scenes like we saw last July, where they're outside the station trying to cause criminal damage. I have a whole video going through it with evidence. The same thing would happen, and I think that's why the IOPC feel like their hands are tied. Because on top of this, their existence is frankly under threat if reform gets into place, because they're going to see that they are kowtowing to this sort of thing, making poor decisions because of it, and so reform is basically going to gut it out and replace it with something that's fit for purpose, which I'm on the side of. Anyway, while we're on reform, obviously they are in the middle of their 6-week campaign to get how crime-infested Britain really is these days front and centre of all their campaigning. And obviously as part of that, some of the MPs and councillors have been on radio and television talking about just that. And since we're on the subject of female officers, I do have to say it is quite interesting that Cheshire housewife nationalist Sarah Pacha was on BBC Radio 5 Live to talk about, well, female officers, because let's face it, I think there will have been different outcomes had all the police officers been men. But this is what Sarah Pacha had to say about female officers.
Never feel comfortable actually seeing 2 female police officers together. I'd much rather see a great big strapping male police officer with a female, but female police officers are incredibly...
You don't feel comfortable if there were 2 female trained police officers?
I think they look vulnerable, but, you know, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, this became quite a topic of conversation, and I have to say I somewhat agree. There's obviously a place for women in the police force. On the front line trying to arrest and tackle down criminals, obviously not there. They can help police officers on the beat, say if they want to search women criminals and things like that on the street. However, it's one of those things that it's still somewhat difficult to say in public, unless obviously you're Sarah Pacha, who doesn't really seem to care. But pretty much as everyone has seen clips of female police officers trying to arrest male suspects who are, if not twice the size of them, 1.5 times the size of them, and there's no way they're getting them. There used to be height requirements and much better physical requirements to actually become a police officer who would be on the beat. But these days, obviously, you send 6 police officers to ask parents why they've been a bit mean about the board of governors at a school. So it's not exactly surprising, along with the fact that we have an awful lot of DEI and quotas, obviously, that we've ended up with a police force that has trouble arresting people and gets their noses broken when they do. And then obviously you have social stigma against actually beating up blatant criminals. Honestly, if you've watched, and I'm sure this was not their intention, but if you have watched Life on Mars or Ashes to Ashes, I think there is genuinely a national mood to bring back your average DCI Gene Hunt. Yeah, the type of police officer that doesn't take any guff, I suppose is the way to put it, and is the strapping gentleman Pacha is talking about, who will stop at nothing to try and stop scum on the streets. It's a very good show, by the way. I've not seen Ashes to Ashes, but Life on Mars is very good. And it does address the issue of women officers, which obviously the show's based in the 70s. There weren't many of. They were largely stuck in admin roles, but again, they had a place, and obviously there's sexism in the show. Obviously less of that would be good. But we've clearly overcorrected from here is the point. Ultimately, as the point has to be made again and again, you would not have 2 injured female officers, one with a broken nose, if the people actually arresting these 2 people were actually men who were over, I don't know, 5'10" or whatever the old height restriction was. And that's fine. You can have the women on board in the street doing what they can to help stop crime, but ultimately when it comes to chasing down and arresting, let's face it, violent criminal men, they will only have limited use, and in some cases, to be honest with you, might even be a hindrance, but, you know, there's men who can be a hindrance too. That's why we need to up training, that's why you need to have basic physical standards, and this is the sort of thing you don't have in the police anymore, because all they really need to do is pass a bleep test. They don't even have to do obstacle courses in the UK, despite the fact that most of the time when you're chasing criminals, you're going to have to scale walls and things like that. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but I did find it interesting that Sarah Pochin of Reform is quite happy to throw that out there into broadcast media and radio. So with that, I will leave it there. If you enjoy what I do, please do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Great way to help out the channel. You can also become a member or also leave super chats and super thanks should you have the spare cash to do so. I very much appreciate it. As for shilling, obviously we've got Hollow Knight tonight, we've got Tosh News next Tuesday and Laughing at the Guardian next Saturday, with obviously another Hollow Knight playthrough next Thursday too. Right, videos out as and when I can make them. With that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.